Right now, calls to resign. The Dallas County Democratic Party demands Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson step down after he announces he's becoming a Republican.
The message is clear. Mayor Johnson must resign. He has defrauded the voters of Dallas.
Vows to fight. Some of the former top deputies of Attorney General Ken Paxton say they'll keep pursuing their whistleblower lawsuit against the state.
We will fight for justice in this case as long as it takes.
Drag show legal battle. A federal judge in Houston declares the state's new law limiting drag shows unconstitutional on the grounds it violates free speech. Both sides weigh in on this issue. I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. This is Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. Hello and welcome. We begin in Dallas, where Mayor Eric Johnson's nationwide announcement in the Wall Street Journal that he's becoming a Republican is creating more of a stir. Days after Friday's news, the Dallas County Democratic Party chair went to the city council meeting and called on the mayor to resign. Steve Pickett has the story.
Dallas deserves better.
Cardell Coleman spoke to a mayor who was not present this afternoon. Mayor Eric Johnson led the morning session of this month's city council meeting, but when the chair of the Dallas County Democratic Party stood to speak, Mayor Johnson remained absent.
There were hundreds, maybe even thousands, who have worked hard to elect you. I've heard from many of them regarding your political change. You have betrayed their trust.
That political change came from Mayor Johnson's nationally published declaration. He is a Democrat no more. Mr. Johnson's touting of a reduction in violent crime, a call to lower taxes and build more parks under his first term as mayor, garnered re-election as a Democrat for a nonpartisan seat in Dallas. But this came last week. Johnson writing for the Wall Street Journal saying, "The future of America's great urban centers depends on the willingness of the nation's mayors to champion law and order and practice fiscal conservatism, and that has the characteristic of the GOP." So now he's a Republican, and Johnson critics at City Hall today pushed back.
This seat was not partisan until the mayor made it so. The message is clear. Mayor Johnson must resign. He has defrauded the voters of Dallas. People are enraged.
The mayor made no statements about his party affiliation switch, but his old party now has a petition seeking signatures to call for his resignation. In Dallas, Steve Pickett, CBS News Texas.
A federal judge in Houston has declared the state's new law limiting drag shows unconstitutional.
The decision on constitutional grounds that the judge entered was the correct one.
Democratic State Representative Julie Johnson of Farmers Branch is among those who fought against the new state law, Senate Bill 12. It makes it illegal for sexually oriented performances to be shown where people younger than 18 can watch them. That includes public property and in a business, and there are criminal and civil penalties. In his ruling this week, federal judge David Hittner said the state law is overly broad and infringes on the First Amendment and chills free speech. Quote, "A large amount of constitutionally protected conduct can and will be wrapped up in the enforcement of SB 12. It is not unreasonable to read SB 12 and conclude that activities such as cheerleading, dancing, live theater, and other common public occurrences could possibly become a civil or criminal violation of SB 12.
It's already illegal to take children into a strip club or something like that. But this goes far, far beyond that. A Miley Cyrus concert, any Super Bowl halftime show could come under the purview of this bill in terms of its gestures, its clothing, its attire.
Look, this is not debatable. We are not going to allow children to be sexualized in the state of Texas.
Republican State Representative Matt Shaheen of Plano sponsored the bill in the House and criticized the judge's ruling.
If you read the bill, it has very specific descriptions of sexual activity in front of a child. We're talking about simulating sexual activity, those types of things. And again, this is language that has been used in other states. It's prevailed. The judge is just making a foolish ruling. And
it's a case that either side could appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Former top deputies of Attorney General Ken Paxton are vowing to keep up their whistleblower lawsuit against him and the state. They held a news conference this week now that Paxton returned to his office after being acquitted of all the impeachment articles by the Texas Senate. Here's Jason Allen.
Ken Paxton survived impeachment without testifying or even attending his trial. But employees who first reported him to the FBI said Monday they'll keep trying to get their former boss on a witness stand.
In our suit, he will have to testify, or he will have to plead the fifth in open court.
The four whistleblowers filed a motion with the state Supreme Court Monday to allow their wrongful termination lawsuit against Paxton to continue. The court put it on hold in February when it appeared there was a $3.3 million settlement agreement, but the legislature never agreed to pay it.
If the legislature chooses to fund it, that's great. If they choose not to fund it, then we're asking the Supreme Court to rule and let us go back to the district court.
A trial in a regular courtroom would be free of political pressures that they said thwarted the impeachment trial. And not only could Paxton be asked to testify, but also his wife, Senator Angela Paxton, girlfriend Laura Olson, and real estate investor Nate Paul.
We will fight for justice in this case as long as it takes.
The group also publicly acknowledged House members who moved forward with impeachment and senators who voted for it, thanking them for not wilting, they said, under political pressure. In Fort Worth, Jason Allen, CBS News, Texas.
Senator Cornyn, who expressed concerns about the allegations against Paxton, said that he respects the jobs of the Texas Senate and House and that it's time to move on. Cornyn was asked about Paxton's comment that he may challenge him in a primary March 2026. First, here's what Paxton told Tucker Carlson on the platform X last week.
You know what? I think he's never really had competition.
Why don't you run against him?
Hey, look, everything's on the table for me. Now that I've been through this and I've seen how guys like John Cornyn have represented the state of Texas and not represented us, I think it's time somebody needs to step up and run against this guy that will do the job and do it the right way and represent us and worry about what's going on at the border.
Look, I'm focused on a lot of more important and urgent things like the ones we're talking about here today. One of the things I would hope is that people would wake up to the fact that we lost 71,000 Americans due to fentanyl and synthetic opioid.
Now to another issue that's heating up, school choice. Governor Greg Abbott says he's calling a special legislative session next month, and he's pressuring lawmakers to pass it. He took his message to a high school football crowd in Dallas.
Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Friday Night Lights, political style. At a Parents Matter tailgate at First Baptist Academy in Dallas, Governor Greg Abbott rallied support for his vision of school choice.
One of the freedoms we believe in is the freedom of parents to choose what is right for their child. And that's what school choice is all about.
During a special legislative session he intends to call next month, Abbott wants lawmakers to pass a bill that would establish taxpayer-financed education savings accounts, allowing some public school students to attend private schools. Democratic State Representative Venton Jones of Dallas calls them vouchers and says they will hurt public schools.
Right now, more than ever, we need to be putting finances into our schools right now. And whatever we call it, whether it be a voucher or education savings account, it's taking needed resources out of our schools. And right now, that is just not acceptable.
The group Moms Against Greg Abbott is airing an ad in rural areas opposing the idea.
Don't let vouchers turn off our Friday night lights.
But Sean Baker, a graduate of First Baptist Academy and whose daughter attends now, says she supports tax dollars being spent to send students to private schools.
I guess I look at it as that everybody's paying taxes. Everybody's putting in those tax dollars. I'm putting in the tax dollars that go towards my kids' education.
The big question this time, of course, is whether Governor Abbott will score a legislative victory this time around. In the past, rural Republicans and Democrats in the Texas House have blocked it. So now he's hoping parents will make the difference.
You cannot sit on the sidelines and cheer. You have to get on the field yourself. The way that you do that is you get involved by making a phone call to your state representative.
The governor has vowed if school choice doesn't pass during a third special session, he'll have lawmakers tackle the issue again in a fourth session at a later date. Governor Abbott was in New York this week, where he rang the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange Thursday. But before that, he made an appearance at the Yale Club, where he answered questions about the state's migrant bus operation. He defended sending more than 15,000 migrants into New York City, reiterating that they got into the buses voluntarily. He also blamed President Joe Biden's immigration policies for the increase in migrant crossings.
What's going on is unsustainable. It's a crisis, it's chaotic, and it must stop.
The governor says what New York is witnessing is, quote, a tiny fraction of what is happening every single day in the state of Texas. Coming up, we speak with a Democrat and a Republican about the impact of Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson's decision to change political parties. Then later, we go one-on-one with one of Attorney General Ken Paxton's top former deputies turned whistleblower about what's ahead for their lawsuit against the Attorney General's office. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson created a political firestorm late last week when he announced in the Wall Street Journal that he's switching from being a Democrat to a Republican. Since then, the Dallas County Democratic Party has called on him to resign. We spoke with Matt Engel, director of the Lone Star Project, a Democratic research and communications PAC.
Democrats holding Democrats accountable and holding their leaders accountable. You don't see enough of that. And on the Republican side, they restore criminal AGs to their office, and it looks like they're going to nominate a criminal again for president. And so I think this is an example of Democrats doing the right thing. Anytime that you're getting a congratulations from Newt Gingrich and Ken Paxton and Dan Patrick, you know you've done the wrong thing. And so Eric Johnson clearly did the wrong thing for his city. And I think it was right for Democratic leaders to call him out and call him that he be accountable and step down from office.
Why do you believe he should resign? I know that Democrats have called this a betrayal. Why is that?
Well, it is a betrayal. It's not necessarily betrayal of Democrats. It's betrayal of the citizens of Dallas. It's clear that he timed this until after the mayor's race, when he had been identified as a Democrat his entire career, and waited until he was back in office, knowing that had he declared as a Republican before the last election, he probably wouldn't have gotten elected to mayor, and he certainly would have had vigorous opposition. And so I think it was a weak move, a sketchy move, particularly that he announced it in the Wall Street Journal. Stockbrokers in New York knew about his betrayal before families in Dallas did.
This was the statement that he released to the media today, Wednesday, as we were talking. He said, quote, "The future of America's great urban centers depends on the willingness of the nation's mayors to champion law and order and practice fiscal conservatism. Our cities desperately need the genuine commitment to these principles that has long been a defining characteristic of the GOP." What's your thought of that?
Well, my guess is he got that email to him from Greg Abbott's office. I mean, the truth of the matter is that Dallas is not just a Democratic city. In fact, Dallas has rejected Texas Republican leaders by a higher margin than it is Democratic. Greg Abbott and John Cornyn and Ken Paxton all got less than 35% support in the city of Dallas. Donald Trump got less than 30% support in the city of Dallas. Dallas is not that Democratic. That means that there are a lot of independents and fair-minded Republicans that are rejecting state leadership too. For Eric Johnson to join that team, he clearly is betraying Dallas and abandoning the type of leadership that it wants.
Do you think he will resign? And if he doesn't, what impact do you think that this would have on around the horseshoe in the city government, city council? And I mean, keep in mind, obviously, this is still a nonpartisan office.
Oh, I doubt that he'll resign. I don't think he has the courage to resign, frankly. I think he will be badly weakened. Dallas, by definition, has a weak mayor system. Well, I think that Eric Johnson has now applied that description to his character. That, it hasn't been that long ago, but people have been around a while might remember Phil Gramm, who had been a Democrat and he switched to a Republican, but he had the courage and he had the character to resign from office and then run as in a special election, and he got himself reelected as a Republican. I didn't agree with Phil Gramm on a lot of things, but I always thought that was really a show of strength. I don't think Eric Johnson is strong enough to resign his seat and then seek re-election again when people know that he's betrayed them to become a Republican.
What political opportunities do you see for him going forward in the Republican Party?
Very few, most likely. I think they would be appointed type of things. The track record for people of color being nominated to high office in the Republican Party in Texas is very bad. Look at Eva Guzman. Even George P. Bush only won election to the land commissioner's office after the Republicans cleared the field for him in the primary. When he was in a contested primary against an Anglo-Republican, he lost. Texas Republicans have a record of hostility against people of color. And so I think if there's a future for Eric Johnson in the Republican Party, it's probably some appointed position, or they might find him a high-paying job in some corporate law firm.
So in the end, and you haven't spoken to him, I haven't interviewed him just yet, but in the end, why do this then? If there's no, elected office, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not sure that he's seeking elected office. I think that he's looking for a soft landing, and I think he has really alienated a lot of Democrats over the last several years. He would have had a hard time winning a Democratic nomination in a statewide office. For Democrats who've been paying attention in Dallas, they weren't surprised at all that he switched parties. I was a little surprised by the timing. I think it was probably calculated by Republicans who wanted to do something in the aftermath of them having restored Ken Paxton to office and knowing how much damage that did to them among a lot of mainstream Republicans. I think they wanted to talk Eric into doing it now so that was a signal to some mainstream Republicans that their party wasn't so bad, wasn't so extreme. So my guess is that this is really something that's being done to advance Republican goals, not anything that's really going to help Eric Johnson. I think he's really been kind of gamed in this thing by the Republicans who have been really working him for the last couple of years.
Matt Engel, director of the Lone Star Project, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack.
We also spoke with Vinnie Minchillo, a Republican strategist at Glass House Strategy, about Mayor Johnson's announcement and the reaction to it.
Well, it feels a little sour grapes to me. In a lot of ways, it's like, Dak Prescott coming to the coach and saying, hey, look, I don't think this team can win. I want to trade. So, I can understand how they're unhappy. One of their star players doesn't want to be on the team anymore, but there's a lot of good reasons for him to make that switch. Now, as far as him going before city council and complaining about it and demanding a resignation, I think that's not right. I mean, it's a nonpartisan election. So in a nonpartisan election, you vote for the person, not the party. That's how it's supposed to be. So really, the Democratic Party, they really don't get a say in that.
Democrats have said it's not necessarily a betrayal of Democrats, but more of a betrayal for the citizens of Dallas, most of whom are Democratic. They're aligned with the Democratic Party. So how do you react to that?
I go back to that. It's a nonpartisan election. And that's the whole point of a nonpartisan election is to vote for the person and not the party that we're in. Can it be less tribal? And that's what it's all about. So the Democrats are upset, but I just don't think they have a case. Some people have talked about recall. They've started a petition. So we'll see what happens. I think a recall election is not practical at this point. But I really just think it's sour grapes.
Well, they say timing is key because they said, why didn't he come, out with this before the election and before Michael Hinojosa, the former Dallas ISD superintendent, decided against running against him?
Well, the timing is interesting, and I don't know if it was on the table or not before his last election. I think the timing now is very interesting. It's after the Ken Paxton trial. It's after the budget is settled for the city. So, part of the question is, is he doing it now so he can take a run at the open Colin Allred seat? Or is he going to wait until his term is up and try to run for something in 2026?
And let me ask you, because, the mayor issued a statement today, Wednesday, when we are speaking, and he said, quote, "The future of America's great urban centers depends on the willingness of the nation's mayors to champion law and order and practice fiscal conservatism. Our cities desperately need the genuine commitment to these principles that has long been a defining characteristic of the GOP." And so I'm wondering, can a fiscal conservative, is that reason enough for the mayor, do you believe, that he can win turn that into a win in a GOP primary in the state?
Well, that's a great question. And as a right now, if you're a fiscal conservative, a pro-police fiscal conservative, certainly there's not a place for you in the modern Democratic Party. That's not a winner on the D side. Is that a winner on the R side? To some extent, I think he's got a good start. Fiscal conservatism is kind of table stakes to work in a Republican primary. I think his positions on social conservatism are going to be, a little bit of a problem. Right now, it's all kind of rainbows and unicorns. Welcome to the party. Everybody's tweeting him and all that. But I think once he shows up in a primary, we're going to have to see what his positions really are.
And so what is the potential upside of him doing this, politically speaking?
Well, you look, I think if you want a political career in Texas, the Democratic Party just simply has nothing to offer you. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. There's no way up. So really, Republican is the only way up. So the trick is will he be able to find races and constituents and pull together groups of people, that will agree with him. Right now in Texas, to be successful, you got to be a fiscal conservative, but you really got to be a social conservative. And he's one of those things, fiscal conservative, but not too social conservative. Are we ready for a pro-choice fiscal conservative in statewide Texas? Not sure.
Coming up, we go one-on-one with Blake Brickman, one of the former top deputies of Attorney General Ken Paxton, about the whistleblower lawsuit he and others filed against the state. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. We'll be back in a moment. This week, some of the former top deputies hired by Attorney General Ken Paxton held a news conference to discuss their next steps in their whistleblower lawsuit against the state. They include Blake Brickman, who spoke with us about their fight going forward.
We asked the Texas Supreme Court, our case has been tied up for over 2 years by Attorney General Ken Paxton. We've not been able to take any discovery. He's made the legal argument that the law does not apply to him, and that is pending before the Texas Supreme Court right now. So we've asked them to rule in our favor and to send the case back to Travis County so that we can have a trial and we can actually depose Ken Paxton, so that for the very first time in this entire 3-year ordeal, Ken Paxton will have to answer for what he did.
And so the case, the reason all of this came to an impeachment level was because the Attorney General offered to settle. Isn't that right?
He did. His lawyers called our lawyers earlier this year and said that they would like to discuss settlement with us. And we did reach a preliminary settlement agreement in that case that was the basis for the impeachment. But two things never happened, Jack. We never actually entered into a formal settlement agreement, which the preliminary agreement required. And we also never got funding from the legislature. So because of that, we're asking the Texas Supreme Court to send us back to have a trial.
And that lack of funding by the legislature is what sparked the House investigation in the first place into the impeachment process.
That's right.
My understanding is that you were not part of the settlement. The other 3 whistleblowers who filed suit were. Why did you decide not to be a part of the settlement?
Well, this case was always more than just about money to me, Jack. I did not go to the mediation. There were 4 plaintiffs. 3 of my colleagues went to the mediation, and they came back to me and said, Blake, what would it take for you to agree to settle this case? And I said, Ken Paxton needs to apologize to us for calling us rogue employees. He needs to agree that the law applies to him and not try to overturn the Third Court of Appeals decision that when they ruled in our favor that the law did apply. And when Attorney General Ken Paxton agreed to those 2 provisions, I said, fine, I'll sign the preliminary agreement. But I never attended mediation. And this case is always about more than just money to me.
And so let me ask you, you did not win, your side, the House did not win its impeachment. Obviously, the Senate acquitted Paxton of all 16 articles. They dismissed the other 4. And so I'm wondering, why are you confident that you will win in a court of law as opposed to the impeachment?
Well, even Lieutenant Governor Patrick referred to the impeachment trial as a political trial. And that's very different than being in a court of law. If we're back in Travis County, we're going to have a judge that's very familiar with all the rules of evidence, who's tried many civil cases. And even more importantly, Jack, we're going to have a jury of our peers who are not politicians, who are subject to political persuasion. So I think we'll have a different outcome, but I don't want to be presumptuous. The Texas Supreme Court first has to rule in our favor and send it back to Travis County. But I think that when we have a trial there, that we will be, victorious. There's actually a presumption in Texas whistleblower law that if you're fired within 90 days of making a report to law enforcement, there's a presumption that you were fired for that reason. And in our case, all of us were fired within, I think, 45 days. For me, it was about 20 days, but all of us were fired within that 90-day window.
You mentioned before that that in this case, they may, force the Attorney General to provide some kind of testimony about this case. What else will be allowed, do you believe, in this case that we did not hear during the impeachment?
Well, I think the big thing that we did not see during the impeachment is Lieutenant Governor Patrick ruled at his sole discretion that Attorney General Paxton did not have to testify. So I think that was a huge reason that we ended up with the result we got in the impeachment trial. But a Travis County judge we don't think would rule that Attorney General Paxton couldn't testify. This would be a civil case. It's not a criminal case. So Attorney General Paxton would either have to testify or he would have to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights in court, which is a very, very different from what we just witnessed in the impeachment trial.
And what about some of the other people, like there was Laura Olson, his alleged mistress, who was not forced to testify? How helpful do you think that would be to the case?
We think it'd be very helpful. And again, I don't want to be presumptuous. If we have a trial, if the Texas Supreme Court sends it back, we will call Laura Olson. We will call Nate Paul. We will call Raj Kumar, who is the contractor on Attorney General Paxton's home. And we will also try to call Senator Angela Paxton to see what she knew about this as well. We're going to try to get to the bottom of this, try to get all the truth out, full transparency for the people of Texas.
What was your reaction when, one by one, as Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and the Secretary of the Senate, Patsy Squaw, read off the votes and, Paxton was acquitted on each count? What was going through your mind and what were you thinking?
Well, Jack, I couldn't actually watch the full trial, but I did testify and I was allowed to watch the closing arguments and I was allowed to sit through the votes. So I did both of those things. I sat through the closing arguments. I thought Chairman Andy Murr did a fantastic job of summarizing all the evidence. And then the very next day, I sat there through all 16 votes and watched 16 Republican state senators essentially condone corruption in our state. It was extremely disappointing. I think the precedent set from this case is very dangerous. I don't know why any public employee would ever report their boss to wrongdoing based on the results of this case. And that's why we're going to keep fighting, is I don't want that to be the story of this. We want there to be vindication. We want there to be no corruption in state government. I'm a conservative, loyal Republican who has spent 2 decades kind of fighting conservative battles. And I do not want to see the Republican Party of Texas become the party of corruption.
What did you make of the Lieutenant Governor really targeting and criticizing the House for what he called rushing this impeachment? He really criticized the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, and said one of the problems was that you and the others were never put under oath during this investigation. And he said that more changes need to be made so that the process, everybody who comes forward is put under oath. Did he have a point there?
I don't think so. I don't think Lieutenant Governor Patrick understands how criminal investigations happen. When you meet with criminal investigators, they do not put you under oath. You cannot lie to criminal investigators. And even in the Senate impeachment trial, we all were under oath. I mean, we all swore an oath. So I really don't understand why that's been.
He was referring to the House process because, there was no, the House members had to vote, pretty quickly after the case was brought to them. And so that was the process that he was criticizing. So what do you make of that?
That's how criminal investigations happen. When you meet with law enforcement officers and you report crimes, you don't always be put under oath. There are laws and rules against lying to law enforcement that apply. So I've never really understood this criticism about not being under oath, because if you talk to any prosecutor or any investigator with the FBI or with the state, like, that's just not how these things are conducted.
Two other questions, and I appreciate your time. It was 3 years ago this week, on Saturday the 30th, that you and the others went to the FBI, the other former top deputies of Attorney General Ken Paxton. How confident are you that that investigation is still going on and that the Attorney General may face federal charges? He may be indicted by the feds?
Yeah, I really can't speak a lot about that, Jack, other than I can confirm the investigation is still ongoing. And one point that I would love to clarify for your viewers that often gets lost in this whole discussion about the investigation is Ken Paxton is out there telling people this is all a political witch hunt. Well, this investigation 3 years ago, like you said, this Saturday, can't believe it's been 3 years, by the way, started when Donald Trump was president. So Donald Trump controlled the Department of Justice. Donald Trump controlled the FBI. And remember, the allegations against Ken Paxton were from his 8 most senior aides. So the idea that this is a political witch hunt, when it started when Donald Trump was president, based on allegations that arose from Ken Paxton's top 8 people, is really ridiculous.
I was going to ask you about that because he blamed the Biden administration, Texas Democrats, and Speaker Phelan for this impeachment process.
Yeah, I think that's just totally made up. I think that if you watch Tony Busby during the impeachment trial, no one's ever really defended Ken Paxton's actions here. No one's really saying Ken Paxton is innocent. No one's really defending what Ken Paxton did. It's always these sideshows of that it's, like you just said, something that's totally unrelated, something that's totally untrue. But the fact of the matter is, Ken Paxton abused his office for Nate Paul. And in return, Nate Paul hired the woman that Ken Paxton was having an extramarital affair to. And Nate Paul also remodeled Ken Paxton's home, which he covered up after he knew he went to the FBI by making a payment, by coming up with a doctored invoice. And all these Republican senators that say there was no smoking gun, I would ask them, what was that payment that was made months after he moved into his home based on an invoice that didn't exist at the time other than a smoking gun?
Do you think the House did a good enough job presenting its case?
I do. I think if you watch Chairman Murr's closing, he laid out article by article, evidence by evidence, exactly the evidence that would have led, I think, a reasonable juror to rule that Ken Paxton is unfit for office.
Blake Brickman, former Deputy Attorney General in the Texas Attorney General's office. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today. That's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you again next week. You're watching CBS News Texas.